Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The smell hit me first. Not the usual diesel and rust you'd expect on a river barge, but something older, like wet earth mixed with copper pennies. My grandfather used to tell me that smell meant the river was hungry. I thought he was just trying to scare me. I was wrong. If you're listening to this right now, comfortable in your bed, maybe with the lights dimmed low, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you isn't just a story. It's a warning. And by the time I'm done, you'll understand why some rules should never be broken. Drop a comment below if you've ever felt that chill, that inexplicable dread near water. Because after tonight, you'll never look at rivers the same way again. Now, let me tell you what really happens on the Mississippi after dark. The story begins now. My name's Jake Thornton, and 3 weeks ago, I took a job I should have walked away from. 28 years old, fresh out of the merchant marines, I figured working a cargo barge on the Mississippi would be easy money. Simple work. Good pay. The recruiting officer in Memphis made it sound like a paid vacation. Just follow the rules, he'd said, tapping a yellowed piece of paper on his desk. The river's got its ways. I barely glanced at that paper. Should have read every word, memorized them, tattooed them on my damn arm. The MV, Charlotte, pushed off from Baton Rouge on a Tuesday morning, October 15th. The crew was small, just 7 of us. Captain Roy Hutchins, a man who looked like he'd been carved from driftwood. The engineer, Tommy, barely spoke above a whisper. The cook, Miss Sarah, always humming old spirituals. And 3 other deckhands like me, though they'd all been on the river longer. That first day was normal. We loaded grain containers, secured the barges, did the safety checks. The Mississippi stretched out before us like a brown serpent, lazy and wide. I remember thinking how peaceful it looked, but even that first day, I noticed things that didn't add up. The way other barge crews waved at us. Not casual greetings, but specific hand signals. 3 fingers raised, then 2, then 1. Always in that order. Captain Roy would respond with the same sequence, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision. "What's with the hand signals?" I asked during my first break. "Communication," Roy replied, but his eyes didn't meet mine. River folk have their own language. The containers we were hauling were standard grain shipments, at least according to the manifest. But some of them felt different when we secured the tie-downs, heavier than they should be. And they hummed, not the vibration of the engines, but something else. Something that made my teeth ache. Tommy was the first to pull me aside that evening, just as the sun started bleeding orange across the water. "You read the rules?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the engine's hum. "Yeah, sure," I lied. He grabbed my arm, his fingers surprisingly strong. "No." "Did you read them?" Something in his eyes made my stomach turn. I shook my head. He pulled out a laminated card from his pocket, worn smooth from handling. The plastic was yellow with age, the text faded but still legible. "Keep this on you. Always." The card listed 7 rules. 1. Never whistle on the water after sunset. 2. If you hear your name called from the river, don't answer. 3. Count the lights on passing barges. If there's one too many, look away. 4. The river gives and takes in 3s. Respect the pattern. 5. Never throw anything living into the water between midnight and dawn. 6. If the water turns still when it should be moving, go below deck 7. When the fog comes red, follow the old protocols. "What's this about?" I asked, trying to laugh it off. "Some kind of hazing?" Tommy just stared at me. "The river's older than you think, boy. older than New Orleans, older than the natives who first named it. And old things, they got old rules. He leaned closer, his breath smelling of coffee and something metallic. You know what they called this river before we named it Mississippi? Mississippi, the Great River. But before that, before the Ojibwe, before any tribe we know about, it had another name. A name in a language that died out before history began. I pocketed the card, mostly to get him to let go of my arm. That night, I heard my first whistle. It came from the port side, clear and melodic, like someone calling a dog home. I was on watch, fighting to stay awake at 2 a.m., when that sound drifted across the black water. Without thinking, I pursed my lips to whistle back. A natural response. You know, like when someone waves and you wave back. Captain Roy's hand clamped over my mouth so fast I nearly screamed. Don't. His breath smelled like coffee and fear. Never, ever whistle back. He stayed with me the rest of my watch, his eyes scanning the water. About an hour later, we passed another barge heading south. I started counting its lights automatically. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the port. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the starboard. 6? Look away, Roy hissed. But I couldn't. That sixth light, it wasn't electric. It flickered like a candle or a lantern. And behind it, I swear I saw a shadow that didn't match any crew member's shape. Too tall, too thin, moving in ways that made my eyes water. The figure seemed to notice my attention. It turned toward our barge, and even across the dark water, I could feel its gaze. Cold, ancient, hungry. That's when I smelled it again. That copper earth scent, but stronger now. Mixed with something else, something that reminded me of my grandmother's funeral parlor. That chemical sweetness that couldn't quite mask what lay beneath. The barge passed. Roy finally exhaled. You're learning, he said. Most don't pay attention until it's too late. Until what's too late? He pointed to the river. The Mississippis carried more than cargo for 300 years. Every soul that's died in these waters, every secret dropped over the side, every broken promise and blood debt, the river remembers them all. And sometimes, he paused, sometimes it collects. I wanted to laugh, this was insane, but then I remembered that sixth light and the way the figure had moved. No living person moved like that. Joints bending in directions that defied anatomy, arms reaching too far, neck turning too much. What was that thing? I asked. Passenger, Roy said simply. Been riding the river longer than any of us been alive. Maybe longer than our grandfathers been alive. Some folks, when they die on the water, they don't leave, they just change their shift. The next morning, Miss Itoera served breakfast in the galley. Scrambled eggs, bacon, grits, normal food that tasted like ash in my mouth. One of the other deckhands, Marcus, was missing. Where's Marcus? I asked. Everyone stopped eating. Marcus answered, Tommy whispered. Answered what? His name. The river called his name last night, and he answered. I pushed my plate away. That's... You're telling me he just disappeared because he answered when someone called his name? Captain Roy set down his coffee mug. The ceramic clicking against the metal table sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Not someone, he said. Something. The river doesn't use its own voice. It uses the voices it's collected. Your mother, your brother, your best friend from high school. Whoever will make you answer without thinking. Miss Sarah finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus told me yesterday. Said he kept hearing his daughter calling for help. His daughter who died in a car accident 3 years ago. She shook her head sadly, Poor boy's been carrying that grief around like a stone in his chest. The river, it can smell grief, uses it like bait. And Marcus, we'll find him in 3 days, Miss Sarah interrupted. Her humming stopped for the first time since I'd met her. The river gives and takes in threes. 3 hours, 3 days, or 3 weeks. Marcus answered, so 3 days. She was right. We found him caught in the port paddle wheel 72 hours later, to the minute. His eyes were gone, but his mouth was full of river silt and small shells. The kind you don't find in the Mississippi. The kind you'd find in an ocean that dried up millions of years ago. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was his expression. Peaceful. Like he'd finally found whatever he'd been looking for. Like dying had been a relief. We wrapped him in a tarp and radioed ahead to Vicksburg. Standard procedure for accidents on the river. Except this wasn't an accident. That night, I actually read the rules. Really read them. And I started noticing things. Other barges followed the same patterns. Crews that went below deck at specific times. Lights that were arranged in careful configurations. Hand signals between passing vessels that weren't in any maritime manual. The humming containers made more sense now, too. They weren't just grain shipments. They were offerings, payment, tribute to whatever lived in the deep places where sunlight never reached. We were all following the old protocols, every barge on the Mississippi. A secret shared by thousands of river workers, never spoken about on shore, never reported to the authorities. Because what would we say? That the river is hungry? That it feeds on the unwary? That there are things in the muddy depths that have been waiting, watching, collecting? For longer than America has existed? No one would believe us. But you're starting to believe, aren't you? I can tell. You're probably pulling your blanket a little tighter right now. Maybe glancing at the glass of water on your nightstand differently. Good. You should be nervous, because I haven't even told you about the red fog yet. Day 5 on the Charlotte. We were making good time towards St. Louis. The barges riding smooth despite the October current. I'd started to adapt to the rhythm, checking the rules obsessively, counting lights, never whistling, never answering voices from the water. But you can't prepare for everything. It started around 3 p.m., wisps of fog despite the warm afternoon. Not unusual for the Mississippi, except this fog had a tint to it, like someone had mixed rust into the water vapor. Captain Roy's face went pale as November snow. "All stop," he barked into the radio. "All stop and anchor, now." The engines died. The sudden silence felt wrong, like the world had stopped breathing. The red fog thickened, crawling across the water like something alive. "Below deck," Roy ordered. "Everyone, now." "But someone needs to maintain watch," I started. "The old protocols override Coast Guard regulations," he snapped. "When the red fog comes, you go below and you wait." We crowded into the galley, 7 souls pressed against the small portholes, watching the world outside turn crimson. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds. Ice formed on the windows despite the Louisiana heat. That's when we heard them. The other barges. Dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. Their engines silent but their hulls creaking and groaning as they passed. Through the red fog, I could make out shapes. Barges that looked wrong. Too old. Flying flags from companies that went bankrupt decades ago. Some had paddle wheels that shouldn't exist anymore. Others had smokestacks belching black smoke from coal furnaces. "Don't look too close," Miss Sarah whispered, her fingers working a rosary I hadn't noticed before. The red fog brings them through, all the vessels the rivers claimed. They're sailing their routes still, following contracts that expired before your grandparents were born. One barge passed close enough that I could read the name on its hull, Sultana. I knew that name. Every river worker did. The Sultana exploded in 1865, killing more people than the Titanic, the worst maritime disaster in U.S. history. Through its broken windows I saw lights moving, but not electric lights. Lanterns, oil lamps, and shadows of people who shouldn't be there, couldn't be there. Someone was whistling on that ghost barge. A jaunty tune I recognized but couldn't place. Then another whistle joined from a different vessel. Then another, until the red fog filled with a symphony of whistles. Tommy started to purse his lips. I slapped my hand over his mouth the way Captain Roy had done to me. His eyes were glazed, unfocused. The whistling was calling to him, pulling at something deep in his brain. "Fight it," I hissed. "It's not real." But it was real, just a different kind of real. The past bleeding through. The river showing us what it remembered, what it kept. The red fog lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of ghost barges passing, of whistling that tried to crawl into our skulls, of voices calling our names in languages that predated English, French, Spanish, maybe predated human speech altogether. When it finally cleared, the sun was setting, painting the normal world in colors that felt fake after the supernatural crimson we'd endured. Captain Roy did a head count. We'd all made it, though Tommy's eyes remained unfocused for hours afterward. "How often does that happen?" I asked. "The red fog? Maybe 3-4 times a year, always without warning. The river decides when to remember, when to show us what it's collected. And those barges, those were all, every vessel that's sunk in the Mississippi, every soul lost to the water. They're still here, still sailing, still following their routes in whatever dimension the river keeps them." I thought about all the traffic on the Mississippi, thousands of barges every year, 300 years of commerce, of accidents, of disasters. "How many?" I asked. Roy shook his head. "You don't want to know, son. You really don't want to know." But I did know, or at least I could guess. Tens of thousands of vessels, hundreds of thousands of souls, all collected by the river, all waiting in that red fog, all following their eternal routes. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the hull sounded like those ghost barges. Every splash of water against the sides could have been someone, something, trying to board. I stood on deck, watching the river flow under the stars, and I noticed something that made my blood freeze. Our wake, the disturbed water behind our barges. It was forming patterns, deliberate patterns, like something massive beneath the surface was writing messages in the current. I grabbed a flashlight, traced the patterns with the beam. They were words, ancient words. Words in languages I didn't recognize but somehow understood. The river remembers. The river requires. The river returns. 3 statements, always in threes. I was starting to understand the rules weren't just superstition. They were a treaty, an agreement between the living and whatever the Mississippi really was. We follow the protocols, and it lets us pass. But treaties can be broken. And on day 7, that's exactly what happened. His name was Dale, new deckhand we picked up in Cairo, Illinois. Cocky kid from Chicago who thought river work would be an adventure. Captain Roy tried to give him the rules, but Dale laughed them off. "Superstitious garbage," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is the 21st century, not some Mark Twain fairy tale." Dale was everything Marcus hadn't been. Loud, dismissive, convinced that his college education made him smarter than men who'd spent decades on the water. He'd studied environmental science, knew all about river ecosystems and sediment patterns and water chemistry. What he didn't know was that some knowledge is older than textbooks. "You really believe this stuff?" he asked me that evening, waving the laminated rule card like it was a joke. "Counting lights? Not whistling? Come on, man, it's just a river. I tried to explain what I'd seen. The sixth light, the figure that moved wrong, the red fog and ghost barges, but every word made him laugh harder. Mass hallucination, he said confidently. Carbon monoxide from the engines. Sleep deprivation. Isolation psychosis. There's a scientific explanation for all of it. Maybe there was. Maybe every river worker for 3 centuries had been suffering from the same collective delusion. Maybe the patterns in our wake were just random turbulence. Maybe Marcus had simply fallen overboard in his grief-stricken state. But I'd seen that sixth light. I'd smelled that copper earth scent. I'd watched ice form on windows in Louisiana heat. Some things can't be explained by environmental science. That night, he threw his cigarette into the water. At 12:47 a.m. living tissue, human cells, saliva, thrown into the river between midnight and dawn. Rule number 5. Shattered. The river went still. Not calm, still, like glass, like a mirror. The current that had pushed us for 7 days just stopped. Captain Roy burst from his cabin, his face twisted in terror I'd never seen before. All hands implement Emergency Protocol 7. Repeat, Protocol 7 immediately. I didn't know what Protocol 7 was, but the older crew did. They started throwing things overboard, specific things, coffee, exactly 3 cups, coins, 3 silver dollars each, and blood. They all pricked their fingers and let exactly 3 drops fall into the still water. Offerings, Miss, Sarah explained, her voice shaking. The river was disrespected. It needs appeasement. The coins sank without a splash, disappearing into water so still it looked solid. The blood spread in perfect circles, 3 drops becoming 3 rings of red that didn't dissipate or flow with any current. But Dale just laughed. "You're all insane. It's just a river. Water and mud and—" The sound that came from beneath us killed his words. Like a whale's song mixed with grinding metal, mixed with something that might have been laughter. The hull vibrated. The lights flickered. And then the water around us began to spiral. Not a whirlpool. Not exactly. The water was moving, but we weren't being pulled. Instead, things were rising from the depths. Debris at first, logs, trash, twisted metal from long-dead barges. Then the bodies started surfacing. Dozens of them, perfectly preserved by the cold, deep water. Some in modern clothes, others in uniforms from wars I could only guess at. They floated face down in perfect circles around our barge. 3 rings of corpses like some hellish bullseye. Dale wasn't laughing anymore. "The river's showing us its collection," Captain Roy said, his voice steady despite the horror. "Every broken rule has a price. It's showing us what happens to those who don't pay." One of the bodies turned over. It was Marcus, but not the Marcus we'd pulled from the paddle wheel. This was Marcus as he must have looked the moment he answered his name, eyes wide with recognition, mouth open in surprise. Skin pale as paper. Then another body turned, a woman in a 1950s dress, a man in Confederate gray, a child in clothes so old they looked handmade. All of them had their eyes open. All of them were looking at Dale. I don't. Dale stumbled backward. "You broke the treaty," Tommy said, finding his voice for the first time since the red fog. "The river demands payment. 3 lives for 1 broken rule, or what? Or 1 life given freely." The meaning was clear. Dale could sacrifice himself, or 3 of us would be taken. I wish I could tell you Dale was brave, that he accepted responsibility, that he stepped forward and saved us all. But he ran. Tried to anyway. He made it 5 steps before the river itself seemed to reach up. water-defying physics, forming tentacles or arms or something that didn't have a name, and pulled him over the side. He didn't even have time to scream. The water immediately returned to normal, current resuming, bodies sinking back into the depths, like nothing had happened. We never reported Dale missing. What would we say? The river took him as payment for breaking ancient rules. No, officially, Dale never existed. Never signed on, never was. The last 3 days of my journey passed in silence. No one spoke unless necessary. We all followed the rules with religious dedication. Even breathing felt like it might violate some unknown protocol. When we finally docked in St. Louis, I walked off that barge and never looked back. Didn't even collect my last paycheck. Some money isn't worth the price. But here's the thing, and this is why I'm telling you this story. Why I need you to understand, the rules aren't just for the Mississippi. Every river has them. Every body of water old enough to remember. The Hudson has its own protocols. The Colorado demands different offerings. The Great Lakes, the Great Lakes have rules that would make your hair turn white. I spent months researching after I left the river, trying to understand what I'd experienced. What I found was a pattern, a network of knowledge passed down through generations of people who work on the water. Sailors have their superstitions. Fishermen have their taboos. Every coastal town has stories about things that shouldn't be there. Lights where there should be darkness. Voices where there should be silence. The Ojibwe called the Mississippi Mississippi, the Great River. But their older stories, the ones they don't tell outsiders, speak of something else. A presence in the water. A consciousness that existed before the first fish swam upstream. Before the first rainfall carved channels through virgin soil. They made their own treaties with this presence. Different rules, but the same basic principle. Respect and be allowed to pass. Disrespect and pay the price. When European settlers arrived, when steamboats started carrying cargo up and down the river, the old treaties had to be renegotiated. New rules for new people, but the same ancient intelligence deciding who lived and who died. We've built our civilization on top of something ancient, something that was here before us and will be here long after we're gone. We've made treaties we don't remember signing, agreements that bind us to things we pretend don't exist, and the water remembers, it always remembers. The 7 rules I memorized on the Mississippi, they're just one version of a much older contract. Every river worker learns them, passes them down, follows them without question because the alternative is too horrible to consider. But there are other versions, other rules for other waters. The Great Lakes require different protocols entirely. Never sail alone during the storm season. Always carry iron, old iron, cold iron. If you see lights beneath the surface and count them, if there are 13, turn back immediately. The Colorado demands blood, just 3 drops, at the beginning of every journey. The river is young and violent, hungrier than its older siblings, more likely to take without warning. The Hudson is different, older, more patient. It prefers offerings of memory, stories told aloud while crossing certain stretches. Feed it your experiences, your histories, your secrets. The river collects human stories the way others collect coins. Ocean waters follow different rules entirely, older rules. More complex treaties that span centuries and cultures. Every sailor knows them, even if they don't understand why they know them. Don't whistle during a storm. Count the albatross. Never kill a dolphin. Throw bread to the waves during certain seasons. Bury your dead at sea with specific rituals, specific words, specific offerings. Break these rules, and the ocean remembers. I've talked to fishermen from Maine, cargo pilots on the Great Lakes, tugboat operators on the Hudson. They all have stories. They all follow rules that can't be found in any maritime manual, and they all agree on one thing: the water is getting hungrier. Climate change, pollution, overfishing. We're stressing the waters in ways they've never experienced before. The old treaties are straining. The ancient presences that inhabit our rivers and lakes and oceans are running out of patience. More ships disappear now than ever before. More bodies surface with impossible causes of death. More crews report seeing lights where there should be none. Hearing voices where there should be silence. The water is sending us messages, warning us, showing us what happens when treaties are broken on a global scale. So, the next time you're near a river, any river, and you hear something calling your name, or see one too many lights, or notice the water going still when it shouldn't, remember the rules, remember the protocols. Remember that some treaties are written in blood and time, and breaking them costs more than you can afford to pay. Epilogue. The desert. I live in Arizona now. The desert. As far from major rivers as I could get. But sometimes, late at night, I still smell it, copper and earth, the scent of hungry water, and I know the river remembers me. It remembers all of us who've sailed its surface, who've learned its rules, who've seen what lurks beneath. Even here in the desert, hundreds of miles from the nearest navigable water, I can feel it calling. Not my name, not yet, but something deeper. A summons that bypasses language entirely and speaks directly to the part of my brain that still remembers when humans were just another species trying to survive in a world full of older, hungrier things. The Sonoran Desert has its own dangers. Rattlesnakes and scorpions and heat that can kill you in hours. But these are honest dangers, natural dangers, things you can understand and prepare for and sometimes overcome. The Mississippi is something else entirely. An intelligence that predates civilization, that has watched every empire rise and fall from the comfort of its muddy depths, that collects human stories like trophies and human souls like currency. I thought distance would protect me from its influence. I thought living in a place where water is scarce and precious would insulate me from the river's hunger. I was wrong. Last week, I found a shell in my backyard. A freshwater mussel shell, the kind you find in the Mississippi River basin. Perfectly preserved, still damp, sitting on my patio table like someone had just placed it there. There are no freshwater mussels in the Sonoran Desert. There's barely any fresh water at all. But there it was. A message, a reminder. The river remembers. If you've made it this far, if you're still listening, then you're part of it now too. The knowledge is in you. The awareness that water is more than hydrogen and oxygen, that rivers are more than geography. Comment below if you've ever experienced something unexplainable near water. Share this with someone who needs to know the truth. Subscribe if you want to hear more about the treaties we've forgotten, the rules we never knew existed. Because this isn't the only story. Every river worker has them, every sailor, every person who spent real time on the water. We all know the truth. The water is alive, the water is hungry, and the water never, ever forgets. Sweet dreams, and remember, if you hear whistling tonight, especially if you live near water, don't whistle back. Story number 2. Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you happened 3 nights ago at the Millstone nuclear plant in Connecticut, and I still can't explain it. I've worked security there for 12 years, seen my share of odd things, but nothing like this. Nothing that made me question whether time itself can break. You ever notice how digital clocks sometimes glitch? How they display impossible times for just a second before correcting themselves? Most people think it's just a malfunction, a quirk of technology. But what if I told you that sometimes, just sometimes, those glitches show you something real, something that shouldn't exist? Before I tell you what happened, let me ask you this. Have you checked your clock lately? I mean, really checked it? Because after what I saw, I can't stop watching mine. Waiting. Wondering if it'll happen again. The story begins now. My name's Marcus Thompson. I've been doing the night security rounds at Millstone for over a decade. Same route every night. Check the perimeter. Monitor the cooling towers. Verify all access points. Boring work mostly. The kind of job where the biggest excitement is usually a raccoon setting off the motion sensors. That Tuesday started like any other. I clocked in at 11:47 p.m., grabbed my flashlight and radio from the security office. Jerry was finishing his shift, looked more tired than usual. "Everything quiet?" I asked him. He paused, rubbed his eyes. "Yeah, mostly. Just, the clocks have been acting weird in Sector 7. "Weird how?" "I don't know, man. They keep jumping around. Maintenance says it's probably just interference from the new equipment they installed last week." He grabbed his jacket. "Oh, and Rodriguez called in sick. You're on your own tonight." "Great, solo shift at a nuclear plant. What could go wrong?" The first few hours passed without incident. I made my rounds, checked my stations, filled out the hourly logs. The plant hummed with its usual mechanical rhythm. That constant, low vibration you feel more than hear. After 12 years, it becomes like a heartbeat. Comforting, almost. Around 3 a.m., I was in the main control room grabbing coffee when I noticed it. The digital clock on the wall, it read 3:17 a.m. I checked my watch. 3:17 a.m., looked at my phone. 3:17 a.m. Everything synced up perfectly. But then, for just a fraction of a second, I could have sworn the wall clock flickered. Not to 3:18, not backwards to 3:16. It showed 6:46 a.m. I blinked. The clock read 3:17 a.m. again. I laughed at myself. Too much coffee, not enough sleep. Your eyes play tricks on you during the graveyard shift. Everyone knows that. I made a note in the log about the clock glitch, standard procedure, and continued my rounds. The next hour was routine. Checked the emergency exits, verified the backup generators, walked the perimeter fence. The Connecticut woods pressed dark against the chain link, and fog was rolling in from Long Island Sound. Pretty typical for October. At 4:30 a.m., I was heading to Sector 7, the newest part of the facility. They'd just finished installing some kind of experimental monitoring system. Quantum something or other. I didn't understand the science, above my pay grade, but I knew my job. Make sure no one was where they shouldn't be. The hallway to Sector 7 always felt different from the rest of the plant. Newer. Colder. The fluorescent lights had this barely perceptible flicker, like they were vibrating at a frequency just outside normal perception. Made my teeth ache sometimes. I badged into the monitoring room. Banks of screens showed various readings I didn't understand. Numbers and graphs updating in real time. Everything looked normal, except every single digital clock in the room showed a different time. 4:31 a.m. on one screen, 4:33 a.m. on another, 4:29 a.m. on the wall. My watch said 4:32 a.m. I pulled out my phone to check, and that's when things got strange. Really strange. My phone screen went black for a second. When it came back, the time display was glitching. The numbers kept changing. 4:32 a.m., 5:45 a.m., 2:17 a.m., and then 6:66 a.m. This time it stayed there for 3 full seconds. 6 a.m. An impossible time. There's no 66th minute in an hour. Every kid knows that. But there it was, glowing on my screen like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then my radio crackled. Security, please respond. But here's the thing. That wasn't dispatch. The voice was different. Familiar, but wrong. Like someone doing an impression of our dispatcher, Katie, but not quite getting it right. This is Thompson in Sector 7. Who is this? Static. Then, security. Please report to Reactor Building 3. Immediately, my blood went cold. We don't have a Reactor Building 3. Millstone has 2 reactor buildings. Unit 2 and Unit 3, no one who works here would ever call it Reactor Building 3. They'd say Unit 3. Say again, dispatch. Did you mean Unit 3? More static. Then nothing. I tried calling the main security office. No answer. Tried Katie's direct line. Dead air. That's when I noticed the humming had stopped. If you've never been in a nuclear plant, you might not understand how wrong that is. The humming never stops. Ever. It's the sound of coolant pumps, ventilation systems, 1,000 different machines keeping everything stable. When that sound stops, I ran to the window. The cooling towers were still steaming. The exterior lights were still on. Everything looked normal. But the silence, God, the silence was suffocating. I checked the monitoring screens again. The readings were wrong. Not dangerous wrong, just impossible wrong. Temperature readings in negative Kelvin, pressure readings that violated basic physics, and the timestamps. Every single entry was marked 6:46 a.m. I need you to understand something. I'm not a superstitious person. I don't believe in ghosts or demons or any of that. I believe in what I can see, touch, measure. But what I saw next challenged everything I thought I knew about reality. I left Sector 7 and headed for the main control room. The hallways were still lit, but the light seemed thinner somehow, like it wasn't quite reaching all the corners. My footsteps echoed wrong. Too many times. Like the sound was bouncing off walls that weren't there. Halfway to the control room, I passed a window overlooking the parking lot. My truck was there. Jerry's car was gone. But there were 3 other vehicles I didn't recognize. Old models, like from the 80s or 90s. One of them, I swear one of them was the same Ford Taurus my dad used to drive. Same color, same dent in the front bumper from when I backed into a mailbox when I was 16. But that car had been junked 15 years ago. I kept moving. The control room door was closed, which was unusual. It's supposed to stay open during night shift for security checks. I could see light underneath, but it was flickering, pulsing almost. I pushed open the door. The room was empty, but all the monitors were on, and they were showing something. Not the usual reactor data. They were showing security footage, but not from tonight. One screen showed me, but younger, maybe from my first year at the plant. I was doing my rounds, same as always. Another screen showed Jerry, but Jerry from last week, having a conversation with someone just out of frame. A third showed the parking lot, in real time, I think. My truck sitting alone under the sodium lights. But the main screen, the big one that usually shows the reactor core status, that one showed something else. It showed this room, the control room, right now, with me standing in the doorway. But in the footage, I wasn't alone. There was someone standing behind me. I spun around, nobody there, just the empty hallway. I looked back at the screen. The figure was still there, standing just over my shoulder in the footage. Tall, wearing a Millstone security uniform. But the face was wrong. It kept shifting, like it couldn't decide what it wanted to look like. Sometimes it was Jerry, sometimes it was Rodriguez, sometimes it was me. My radio crackled again. Marcus. That wasn't dispatch. That was my voice, my exact voice. Marcus, you need to come to Unit 3 now. Who is this? You know who this is. I'm you. From 6:46 a.m. My hands were shaking. This wasn't possible. None of this was possible. There's no such time as 6:66 a.m. The voice on the radio laughed. My laugh. There is now. There has to be, because that's where you are. I looked at the clocks. Every single one in the control room now showed 6:66 a.m. But they weren't moving. The seconds weren't ticking. Time had stopped. Number. Not stopped. Shifted. What do you want? I asked the radio. I want you to understand. Every night, between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m., there's a minute that doesn't exist. A minute that falls between the cracks. And sometimes, if the conditions are just right, if the quantum field fluctuations from the experimental equipment in Sector 7 align just so, that minute becomes accessible. This is insane. Is it? You're living it right now. You're in the 66th minute of the 6 o'clock hour. A minute that shouldn't exist, but does. And Marcus, you're not the first one to find it. The screens started changing, showing different people, different years, all security guards, all doing their rounds, all looking confused, terrified. I recognized some of them. Patterson, who quit suddenly in 2018, Morrison, who had that nervous breakdown in 2020, Chen, who swore he saw things and transferred to day shift. They'd all been here, in the 6:66 moment. What happened to them? I asked. They left. They found their way back to normal time and pretended it never happened. But you can't unsee what you've seen, Marcus. You can't unknow what you now know. That time isn't as solid as you think. That reality has gaps. The lights flickered again. When they steadied, someone was standing by the main console. It was me, another me, wearing the same uniform, holding the same flashlight, but his eyes were older, tired, like he'd seen too much. "Hello, Marcus," he said. I stood there, staring at myself, my other self. He looked exactly like me, down to the small scar on my left hand from that accident in high school. But something was fundamentally different. The way he moved, too smooth, like he was sliding through space rather than walking through it. "This isn't real," I said. "Define real," the other me replied. "Is real what you can touch?" He picked up a coffee mug from the console, the same Dunkin' Donuts mug I'd been drinking from earlier. "Is it what you can see?" He gestured at himself. "Or is real simply what exists, regardless of whether it should? You're not me. I'm not you yet." He set down the mug. "But you're becoming me. Every second you spend in the 66th minute, you're becoming something else. Something that exists between moments." The monitors behind him started showing new footage. Not security cameras this time. Different angles of the same scene, this room, right now, but from perspectives that didn't make sense. Views from inside the walls, from beneath the floor, from somewhere above that couldn't exist in the building's architecture. "You want to know what happened to the others?" the other me asked. "Patterson? Morrison? Chen? They're still here, part of them anyway, stuck in loops of their own 66th minutes, playing out the same confused terror over and over." As if to prove his point, the door opened. Patterson walked in. But it wasn't really walking, it was more like stuttering, moving forward in jumps, like a video skipping frames. "Hey, Marcus," Patterson said. His voice was hollow, recorded. "Have you seen the time? Something's wrong with the clocks." Then he disappeared, blinked out of existence. "He'll be back," the other me said. In about 3 minutes of subjective time, same routine, same words. He's been doing that for 6 years. This is impossible. The experimental equipment in Sector 7 doesn't just monitor quantum fields, Marcus. It disturbs them, creates pockets where the laws of physics get flexible. The scientists don't know this yet, won't know for another 2 years of regular time, but here, in the 66th minute, the effects are already visible. My radio crackled. Different voice this time. Rodriguez. Marcus, don't listen to him. Get out. Get out now. The other me smiled. Rodriguez figured it out, how to leave, but he paid a price. Tell me, Marcus, has Rodriguez seemed different lately, since he started calling in sick? I thought about it. Rodriguez had been acting strange for the past month. Jumpy, always checking his watch, always muttering about time. He remembers, the other me continued. Even after leaving the 66th minute, he remembers. And that memory is eating him alive. Because once you know time can break, once you've seen the gaps, you can never trust reality again. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. But the monitors stayed on, glowing with that impossible timestamp. 6:66 a.m. You have a choice, the other me said in the darkness. You can try to leave. Find your way back to normal time. Live with the knowledge of what you've seen. Or ... quote. Or what? Or you can stay. Become like me, a guardian of the 66th minute, making sure nothing from here leaks into normal time, making sure the gap doesn't widen. Why would I do that? He pointed at the monitors. They were showing something new now, the reactor core. But not as it should be. The fuel rods were arranged wrong, glowing with colors that shouldn't exist. And the readings, because, he said, in exactly 17 cycles of the 66th minute, the quantum disturbance from Sector 7 is going to synchronize with the reactor's resonance frequency. And when that happens, the 66th minute won't be contained anymore. It'll spread, backward and forward through time, creating paradoxes, destroying causality, unmaking everything. You're lying. Check for yourself. He handed me a tablet. The data was all there. Mathematical models I didn't fully understand, but the conclusion was clear. The 66th minute was growing. Each time someone entered it, it became more stable, more real. The others who got stuck here, he explained, they're not trapped by accident. They're anchors, keeping the 66th minute from collapsing in on itself. But we need more. We need someone who understands, someone who can make the choice willingly. And if I say no, then you leave, if you can find the way. But Marcus, look at your watch. I looked. It still said 6:66 a.m. But now I noticed something else. The second hand was moving, but not forward. It was moving backward. You've been here for negative 17 minutes, the other me said. Time isn't just stopped for you. It's inverting. The longer you stay, the harder it becomes to synchronize with normal time again. Patterson waited too long. That's why he stutters through space. He's caught between flowing forward and backward simultaneously. The door opened again. Patterson reappeared. Hey Marcus, have you seen the time? Something's wrong with the clocks. Same words, same hollow tone. But this time I noticed something else. His shadow was moving independently, pointing in the wrong direction, like it belonged to a different time of day. I need to think, I said. Think fast, the other me replied. In subjective time, you have about 6 minutes before the inversion becomes permanent. After that, you're one of us, whether you choose it or not. I ran, out of the control room, down the hallway, trying to find something, anything that made sense. But the plant had become a maze of impossibilities. Doors led to rooms that shouldn't exist. Hallways doubled back on themselves, and everywhere there were clocks showing 6:66 a.m. I passed windows that showed different times of day simultaneously. Dawn on the left side, midnight on the right. The parking lot kept changing. Sometimes empty, sometimes full of cars from different decades. Once, I saw myself arriving for my shift, but I looked younger, like it was my first day. The radio kept crackling with voices, some I recognized, some I didn't, all telling me different things. Go to Sector 7. Stay away from the reactor. Find the emergency exit. There is no exit. Marcus, this is Katie. Where are you? That last one made me stop. Katie's voice sounded real, present, not like the hollow recordings of the trapped guards. Katie, is that really you? Marcus, thank God, you've been missing for 3 hours. Where are you? 3 hours? But I'd only been in the 66th minute for... I looked at my watch. Still 6:66 a.m. But my phone... When had I pulled out my phone? It showed 7:13 a.m. Katie, something's wrong with time. Marcus, listen to me. We've been monitoring strange readings from Sector 7. The experimental equipment is malfunctioning. You need to get out of there now. But which Katie was this? The real one from normal time? Or another echo in the 66th minute? I kept moving, found myself in Sector 7 again. The monitoring room looked different now, older, newer, both at once. The screens showed impossibilities, the reactor core from angles that didn't exist, the parking lot from above and below simultaneously, and in the center of it all, a door that wasn't there before. Not a normal door, it hurt to look at, like my eyes couldn't quite focus on its edges. But I knew, somehow I knew. It was a way out. I reached for the handle. Don't. The other me was back. But not just one of him, 3, 4, a dozen, all slightly different. Some older, some younger, all wearing security uniforms from different eras of the plant's operation. If you open that door, they said in unison, you'll collapse the 66th minute. Everything trapped here will pour into normal time. Every paradox, every impossibility. The plant won't just melt down. It'll cease to have ever existed. You're lying. Are we? They gestured at the screens. Look. The monitors showed the outside world, but it was wrong. The plant was there and not there. Existing and not existing. People were walking through walls that were solid and permeable at once. Time was flowing in all directions. This is what happens when the 66th minute destabilizes, they said. We're not prison guards, Marcus. We're protectors. Keeping the impossible contained, my phone rang. An impossible thing, since there was no signal in Sector 7. The caller ID said, Mom. But my mom had been dead for 5 years. I answered, Marcus? Honey, where are you? You were supposed to come for dinner. Her voice. Exactly her voice. But she was dead. I'd been at her funeral, unless... When is dinner, Mom? Same as always, Sunday at 6. What year is it? She laughed. Have you been drinking? It's 2019. 2019, the year she died. But she was calling me in 2024. Or was it 2024? Was I in 2024? Or was I in the 66th minute of an hour that existed outside of time? The other versions of me were watching, waiting. I have to go, Mom. Okay, honey. See you Sunday. The line went dead, and I understood. The 66th minute wasn't just a glitch in time. It was where all the lost moments went. The seconds that fell between the cracks, the minutes that got skipped when clocks jumped forward, the hours that disappeared when we fell back for daylight saving. They all ended up here, in the impossible minute. And if I opened that door, if I let them all out, but if I stayed, you'll forget, one of the other EMEs said. Eventually. The specifics fade. You'll remember you have a job to do. Keep the minute stable. Keep the paradoxes contained. but you'll forget why it matters until another guard finds their way here. And then you'll try to explain. Try to make them understand. Just like I'm trying to make you understand now. How long have you been here? They all answered at once. Different answers. 6 months. 2 years. Always. Never. Time doesn't work that way here. I looked at the door again, then at my watch. Still 6:66 a.m. But the second hand had stopped moving backward. It was frozen, balanced on the edge of decision. My radio crackled one more time. Marcus. It was Rodriguez, real Rodriguez, current Rodriguez. I know you're there. In the minute, I was there too. Last month. And I made the wrong choice. I ran, forced my way out. And now I see it everywhere. The cracks in time, the moments that don't line up. People repeating words they haven't said yet. Shadows falling the wrong way. Marcus, there are only 2 choices. Stay and forget who you were, or leave and never forget what you've seen. I stood there, in a room that existed and didn't exist, in a minute that was real and impossible, with a choice that would define not just my future, but my past and present too. The door waited. The other versions of me waited. Time itself waited. I made my choice. What I haven't told you yet is what happened in those final moments before I chose. Because in the 66th minute, final moments can stretch into eternities, and eternities can collapse into heartbeats. As I stood there, hand hovering over that impossible door handle, I began to understand something the other versions of me hadn't explained. The 66th minute wasn't just collecting lost time, it was collecting lost people. Everyone who had ever felt displaced in their own life. Everyone who had ever experienced that strange sensation of being slightly out of sync with reality. The monitors around me flickered, and suddenly I was seeing more than just security footage. I was seeing lives. Fragments of existence from people who had stumbled into moments that didn't quite fit. A woman in Detroit who kept arriving at appointments 5 minutes before they were scheduled, but no clock ever showed her being early. A man in Phoenix who aged 1 day slower than everyone around him, accumulating years of temporal debt that nobody noticed but him. A child in Maine who could sometimes see her own shadow from tomorrow, playing games she hadn't learned yet. They were all connected to this place. All anchored to the 66th minute by the simple act of existing in a world where time occasionally stuttered. "Do you see now?" the other me asked. But it wasn't just one voice anymore. It was dozens, maybe hundreds. All the versions of myself that had stood at this exact crossroads, facing this exact choice. Every time someone chooses wrong, every time someone forces their way out or lets the minute collapse, reality gets a little more damaged, a little more fragile. I thought about Rodriguez, about how he'd seemed hollow lately, not just tired, diminished, like part of him had been left behind in the 66th minute when he escaped. "What happens to the people out there?" I asked, gesturing toward the monitors showing the impossible outside world. The woman who's always early. The man who ages slow. The child with tomorrow's shadow. "If the 66th minute collapses," the chorus of me replied, "they stop existing in any timeline. They become temporal refugees with nowhere to go, and reality starts to unravel. Little things at first. Clocks running backward for a few seconds. People remembering conversations that haven't happened. But it spreads, like a crack in glass. The door's handle felt warm under my almost touch. Beyond it, I could sense the presence of normal time. Normal life. My apartment, my scheduled shifts, the mundane comfort of a world where clocks behaved properly and minutes contained exactly 60 seconds. But I could also sense the cost, not just to me, but to everyone connected to this impossible moment. "How many of you chose to stay?" I asked. "All of us," they said. Eventually. Some tried to leave first, like Rodriguez, but they always come back. Because once you know the truth about time, once you understand what's at stake, leaving becomes impossible. My phone buzzed. A text message. From my own number, the harder choice is always the right one. You know this, you've always known this. I looked at my watch one final time. 6:46 a.m. But as I watched, something changed. The seconds began ticking forward again. But slowly, like time was struggling to remember how to move properly. And I realized something else. I wasn't just choosing my own fate. I was choosing the fate of every lost moment, every displaced second, every person who had ever felt slightly out of step with the world around them. The weight of that knowledge settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. I made my choice. You want to know what I chose, don't you? Whether I opened that door or became another guardian of the impossible minute. Here's the thing. I'm not entirely sure myself. I'm here talking to you. It's October now, 3 days after that night shift. I'm in my apartment in Hartford. Everything seems normal. My truck is in the parking lot. My next shift is tomorrow night. But sometimes I check my phone, and for just a second, just the briefest moment, it shows 6:66 a.m., even in the middle of the afternoon. Sometimes I see myself in the mirror, and there's a fraction of a delay, like my reflection is catching up. Sometimes my radio turns on by itself and I hear voices, security chatter from the plant. But they're talking about things that haven't happened yet, or things that happened years ago. Rodriguez quit yesterday, sent an email to HR saying he couldn't do it anymore. Didn't say what it was. And tonight when I was making dinner, my phone rang. Unknown number, I answered. Hey Marcus, have you seen the time? Something's wrong with the clocks, Patterson's voice. But Patterson hasn't worked at the plant for 6 years. I hung up, checked my watch. 6:66 p.m. There's no 66 minute in an hour. Everyone knows that. But now I know better. Now I know that time has gaps, cracks, moments that shouldn't exist but do. And sometimes we fall through. The question is, am I still falling? Or did I never leave? Check your clock right now. Go ahead, check it. And if, just for a second, you see an impossible time, remember this story. Remember that somewhere in a nuclear plant in Connecticut there are guards standing watch over a minute that doesn't exist. Keeping it stable. Keeping it contained. Keeping you safe from the truth that time itself is broken, and has been all along. Sweet dreams.